Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Thank you, Chris. I'm aware I'm standing between you and drinks, but I don't have a PowerPoint, so maybe there's like a trade-off here. And thanks for welcoming me to Bern and the university. This is the first event I'm doing as an honorary associate, and I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome that the university has shown. I've spent about 20 years more than working in sustainability and climate change and the political aspect, trying to get change and a response to climate change. And for me, it's time to reflect critically with Bern and other people who want to reflect critically on this fairly dire situation, and but also to respond to something which is profoundly positive, which is the rise of cost-competitive renewable energy, which I think changes the game in significant ways that the social movements and the academics and governments haven't really grappled with. And I think gives us a little hope for the future, a little more than we might have thought there was. In this paper, I want to bridge the corporate responsibility conversation that we're having today with the politics of transforming the energy sector. My specific thesis is that there's a handful of pro-renewable organisations around the world which institutionalise a new approach to shared value, I think, and also to energy sector politics and the response to climate change. I think they fuse the interests of companies and climate NGOs in a new way, and I think that the reason the approach works in the energy sector is precisely because it addresses a regulatory shortfall in the original Porter and Kramer work, and some of the critique, therefore, that Dirk Matten and his team have put forward of the CSV, the high-end CSV claims for its potential. So I think, just to return to Dirk's paper, I think from the viewpoint of the climate crisis, the key question in CSV is whether the change that is created is strategic or niche. The original formulation of CSV by Porter and Kramer claims that CSV redefines the purpose of the firm, solves the crisis of capitalism, and so on. Dirk's paper and his co-authors state that this is a very seductive promise, but that CSV hasn't really met the challenge of achieving strategic change and has really only shifted product or sub-strategies within firms. So it hasn't yet led to transformation of markets and whole corporations. So why are markets so hard to shift, whether through CSV or prior forms of corporate sustainability or even from corporate campaigning from groups such as WWF? Well, I don't have a general answer, but I think that there is a specific answer in the energy sector, and it is important because the energy sector is 8 to 10% of the global economy, and the key issue, I think, is regulatory failure. I think the key problem in the energy sector is the regulations don't mandate the shift, and so the shift is very, very hard to create, even in companies that are well-meaning and have sophisticated strategies. So consider one example from Australia, Origin Energy. So for those who are from overseas, Origin is the biggest energy retailer in the country. It was for a time the largest solar installer in Australia. For a period, it advocated reasonably strongly for an Australian emissions trading scheme, and it supported the renewable energy target of 20% renewables by 2020 in the energy sector. It owned significant and interesting intellectual property in solar photovoltaics, a portfolio of wind farm developments, and a stake in geothermal technology. Now, these factors were all excellent. They ranked the company very highly, and even very smart commentators and climate campaigners saw Origin for quite a few years as an example of strategic transformation in the energy sector from fossil fuels to clean energy. Well, unfortunately, Origin's core energy is gas, and after a few years sporting green spots, Origin did revert to type. It resigned from the Clean Energy Council, it stopped supporting a carbon price, and now it opposes the renewable energy target itself. So is this a cautionary tale of failed corporate transformation in CSV? I don't know. But Origin Energy did for a time create shared value by any definition. It created whole new energy products in its businesses. It participated in climate alliances with civil society and other businesses. And it lobbied for and then accepted very generous government subsidies for domestic photovoltaic installations. It made quite a lot of money out of that, and then it went back to business as usual. Now, I don't want to single out Origin Energy here, but rather just to point out that energy sector transformation, perhaps more than many other sectors, is, as Machiavelli would put it, dangerous, to say the least. My case is that without simple regulation in the energy sector to mandate increased renewables, incumbents will stick to business as usual. Now, in the introductory paragraphs of Kramer and Porter's original paper, or the 2011 Harvard Business Review expanded version of the paper, they seem to be saying that regulation is this sort of passé, boring, undesirable, last century thing, only implemented by politicians for sort of base populist reasons. And they complain, I quote, "Diminished trust in business leads political leaders to set politics that undermines competitiveness." So I see it as a wholly negative phenomenon in markets. To be generous and balanced, I think, to Porter and Kramer, I think it's the weakest section of the paper. It just sounds to me like they're playing to the peanut gallery in the consulting world or in the business schools. And thankfully, in the article's sidebar, focused on good government regulation and shared value, they write, "Regulations enhance shared value." To quote, "They create a level playing field to encourage companies to invest in shared value rather than maximise short-term profit." So I'd like to suggest there's some common playing field here between Dirk's team's critiques of CSV, the original formulation in a sort of more sophisticated bent, and what I'm proposing in the energy sector. And I think there's a very good case doing the rounds in the media this week of this key point, that without regulation, market leaders who embrace shared value are vulnerable to competition and will likely fail. Unilever CEO Paul Polman has accepted an award from the Centre for Global Development for switching early to 100% certified sustainable palm oil rather than palm oil grown at the expense of tropical rainforests. And in his speech, he points out the formidable market-leading or dominating power of Unilever. $67 billion in revenue, 2 billion daily consumers, products in 7 out of 10 households globally. So I think if it was plausible that a market-leading multinational could transform a market through CSV-like approaches, you would expect that Unilever's palm oil procurement would be a prime candidate, if not the ultimate case study of that kind of process. When you read what Polman actually said, he said, we need regulations to regulate the industry. He spoke hopefully that if one or two of Unilever's competitors would voluntarily follow Unilever's lead, then that could create a tipping point. They could reach a point where 70% of the market was buying sustainable palm oil, and it was impossible to make a profit as the sin stock, as Dirk was pointing out. But he says, if this doesn't happen, then, quote, "our business is at stake." So I think this resonates strongly with the Origin example. And in Dirk's paper, he writes about a broader sense of responsibility through stakeholder engagement. And I'll quote, he calls for industry-wide solutions and multi-stakeholder initiatives where corporations perceive themselves as a stakeholder of the problem rather than the centre of a stakeholder network. And I'm going to return to that later because I think it's a really pithy description of what's at stake. So what would this look like, and how could it possibly create regulations that transform the energy sector? In the last few years, I've been working on a model with some wind companies here and in other countries, and it turns out, after doing a bit of Google research, that there's an organisation that already exists that does this, and it's called Wind on the Wires, or WOW. Wind on the Wires was formed in the United States in 2001 to accelerate the road to market, as they put it, for wind energy in 9 of the Midwestern states. WOW campaigns to the public, politicians, media, communities and stakeholders with a focus on the regional grid, the MISO, Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. Unlike other well, the majority, really the vast majority, probably 99% of renewable energy industry groups around the world, WOW is an organisational alliance between companies, for-profit companies and non-for-profit NGOs. And that's the key point for me. It's an organisation, it's not just a working alliance. WOW is a $1 million organisation, membership-based. 20% of its funding comes from philanthropies, which is quite crucial because that helps lead the change, and 80% from the companies themselves. Its membership attests to this breadth of stakeholder engagement in the organisation. So its companies include E.ON, GE, John Deere and Vestas, and the NGOs include the National Farmers Union and the Natural Resources Defence Council. Now, just as in Australia or anywhere in the world, getting agreement between NGOs and businesses, let alone farmers' unions, is difficult at the best of times. So I think WOW is important and is probably a unique formula for a shared value or more profound approach to changing the political mix of interests in the energy sector, so you get a transformation of the whole market and not just leaders and laggards. The strategic result of Wind on the Wire's work is they have increased the ambition for renewable energy in the meso states, and the companies involved in the alliance have actually advocated for stronger renewables targets than they would have ever as independent operators or as industry-only advocates. I think that the key is that there's a new type of entity, that WOW is a new kind of entity because it involves companies and NGOs in the same organisation, not just as an alliance, but as a unified organisation with a common interest. Now, Dirk's warned against creating new acronyms, but I'm going to anyway. Now, I like Lord of the Rings and I love irony, so I propose that we could call these sorts of organisations ORCs. Organisational Renewable Campaigns. And the key is that they're not an alliance of interests, they're actually a permanent organisation. And hopefully with Bern we might do more research on how this kind of organisation comes together and how they manage to maintain their momentum despite the fact that they would have quite divergent interests on a lot of issues. My first stab at it is I think that the fact that it's an organisation creates a safe base for the unique, very detailed, granular political work of maintaining an alliance between business on one hand and society on the other. And the result of this is that it creates conditions in the market, political conditions, that lead to regulations, essentially, and that those regulations are imposed across all firms who wish to participate in the meso, whether they're leaders, such as some of the companies who are already members, or whether they're laggards who really have no interest whatsoever in decarbonising. And taking from the description in Dirk's paper about the networks, I think that what's quite profound is that the ORC moves the company out of the narcissistic model where it sees itself at the centre to a negotiation where it's a stakeholder of something bigger, perhaps the society, or if we're a bit philosophical, the climate itself as the centre of the stakeholder network. If the ORCs are able to mandate regulations that decarbonise the stationary energy sector, I think that this fits with the better thinking in Porter and Kramer's original paper around what good regulations are, the new level playing field to create companies to invest in shared value rather than maximise short-term profit. I think that if the ORC model works, and we need to look at the WOW example to see, I think it does address the critique in Dirk's work about CSV being potentially merely a product level or marketing level shift and not a strategic shift in whole strategies of companies and therefore whole markets surrounding them. And I would like to think that if energy firms, including multinationals with interests in gas and oil and nukes, can sit down with climate organisations and create a trusted organisation that forces changes in energy markets, I think that's actually an interesting and potentially important shift in the political economy of the climate debate globally. Thank you. Time for questions.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Pleasure.